Scaling with People podcast. I'm your host and founder and CEO to Guide to HR. And I'm excited to be talking about a very hot topic in the HR world, which is about performance reviews. We're coming up to that season. Everyone's dreading the annual performance reviews. And I'm super excited to have Carla Fowler on the call with us today. We're going to be talking about high performers and big mistakes people make about performance improvements and some principles. So Carla, welcome. Happy to have you. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Guinevere, for having me. So a little bit about myself. For the past almost 12 years now, I have been the managing director, but also founder of my executive coaching practice. And I really focus on working with leaders. This can be founders. This can also be leaders within bigger companies. But I work with them and help them use performance science to approach and pursue goals that they're setting for themselves. So often this is things that are uncertain. They may have risk associated with them. They're things that aren't an easy get. Let's just say that. And I think often when we're faced with things like that, we want to find some other tools where working harder isn't an option. Like, again, if you're starting a company, you're probably working a lot of the time already. So these are the folks that I work with. And again, we've got that sort of theme of performance science to guide us. So that's a little bit about myself. Grew up in the Seattle area. Now I'm a digital nomad. So I move from place to place with my husband, and we're checking out different parts of the country. But yeah, I'm glad to be here, and I'm excited to talk about performance.
Yeah, so getting into it, like I said earlier, it is starting to become performance season. In fact, my husband's like, "Oh, I just got invited to do my performance review again." It's like, my agent heart, like, it dreads this season only because I know my employees and managers dread it. But yet, checking in with employees, telling them what they're doing well, where they can improve, hearing back from them what they're enjoying, learning from them, it is an important conversation that we have. So I'd love to kind of dive in from your perspective and talk about some of the things that you're seeing your clients doing well in this area, and maybe some of the oops, they made those mistakes that we could learn from.
Yeah, great question. One of the things when I think about performance, and particularly this is very relevant to not just generally, but also like at this moment in time when people are thinking about performance, assessing performance, is the ability to focus and really have some clarity around like, what are our objectives? What are our goals? What are we working on? And that's actually something I know we often think about reviews as like, oh, this is when I get critiqued. But I think one of the nice things about having this as a piece of the cycle is we can actually reframe it as the moment when we all kind of check in at all the levels and get some clarity on what are we trying to do? And one of the things as a leader that I think is the most impactful thing you can do is it's where you help your team know how they win. And one of the principles of performance I often talk about is brutal focus, because I think one of the biggest mistakes that we can make is whether you're leading a company or leading a department within a company, or you're founding a company, is we are trying to do so much, right? Like the list of things we could do, or ways in which we could grow or improve ourselves is like so long. And one of the challenges with that is that we often have our effort and our energy diluted. So if we're trying to work on too many different fronts at the same time, then like we lose energy. Sometimes we can feel burned out because we're exhausting a lot of energy, but not seeing the impact because, it's just spread out. And so one of the great things that I see leaders doing really well is when they actually take some time to say, okay, what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish? How can I actually put those words onto paper? Because I think translating what's in our head, like sometimes we have a vision, it's in our head, it's super clear, but actually forcing ourselves to translate that into language is really powerful. It forces clarity when we do that. And that this is a moment in time where we can both say, all right, like what is it that we really want to accomplish over the next year? What is it that are the priorities for that? And then you can even start to map that to your team. And then imagine if you have a leader doing this, you also then like reporting up to that leader, can do this at all the different levels. And practicing that skill set of saying, not what are all the things we could do, but what might be most important to do to reach the goal that we're trying to accomplish, is this great practice. Because number one, it sets you up for success and to avoid the mistake of like, I'm working so hard and I'm trying to do so many things and I just feel like I'm failing. But it also really motivates teams because I think all of us have the very natural human inclination of wanting to know, how do I contribute? How do I contribute to the win? How do I
Yeah.
be seen and recognized for that? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
um, you and I talked about like both like it's always good to know principles, but it's also nice to know like, well, how does one practice focus if you're a leader or if you are working for someone and you have your review coming up? Like, how would one practice that? And I recommend actually deliberately giving yourself some time to think about it. So, for example, don't leave that review till the last minute. Like, actually find your favorite cafe or like your favorite bar, favorite cafe, or even the quiet room in your house that you just love to like have some time in. And actually give yourself a chance to think about like, what is it you want to accomplish? Like, what would be really thrilling or meaningful to you? And try and put that onto paper into some words. It's great to stare out the window and daydream a little bit, but like also force yourself to translate the dream. And then use that as a starting point to really ask some of the questions that you might be like wanting to communicate clearly to either your team or maybe it's to your manager. So, like, what's most important to you? What are some of the areas you might really want to grow in that would impact you in your career, but also might be a real contribution to the team, so that you can be, delivering more value. So, that is the tool I recommend: is actually giving yourself time to do it because it tends to not happen in the cracks between things.
Yeah, I find that founders younger on in the growth of their cycle, it's really hard to like give yourself that space and
Mhm.
to just allow you to sit in that moment and think and analyze what's happened, where you want to go. I think you said it really great earlier. You said put it into words. And I'd take it one step further and put it into words that are simple. Like if you want to put it into your own words, then throw it into an AI and tell AI to simplify it using seventh grade language. Maybe your team needs first grade. Maybe your team can do 12th grade. There is a difference. You should try put your words in and try all three different grades and see how it comes out. It's kind of fun to do that, but keeping it simple, clean, and just making it for everybody to understand. There is no place for miscommunication or misunderstandings because they thought a word meant or the sentiment meant or they read it as XYZ when we were really saying ABC. So I think that's really important is yes, get it into words, but then make it really simple and really make it so that everybody, no matter what level you're talking to, no matter what experience, what department, where, what the people are doing for you, they're all on the same page. I was at a really cool conference earlier in the year, and one of the speakers, she gave this great example, and I think it'll just sit with me forever. Where they went and it was a car manufacturing company, and they brought all of the dealers in to have a conference, and they basically got up and said, "We make the cars, you sell them. In order for us to make our revenue, we need more trucks to be sold. It's not happening. What do you need from us to sell more trucks?" It was literally that first grade. Nobody could go out of that conference and think, gosh, did he mean that we need to go and sell more Beetles or more, more scarves? Like, no, you're a car company and you need to sell more cars, but they really need you to sell the trucks, not just the cars on the lot, right? Like, so I thought that was really, really, like, I took a lot from that because it's just like, it's KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's a great example of just saying, if you read something, one way I say is imagine you had to write something down and then you were going to hand it off to someone else to then make your vision happen. Like, and you actually were not going to be involved. That's a great filter to use to say, is what I wrote down clear enough? Now, of course, you are going to talk to your team over time. This is not going to be a one and done conversation, but I think it's really helpful as a filter to say, how clear is that really? Are there details that if someone else were actually going to execute this, they would need to know? or disqualifiers. So, but I love
Yeah.
your example from the conference. That's a beautiful way of saying what is clear.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so when it comes time to communicate performance, I think we could use the same methodology of just making sure that when we're talking about performance, it's not just what has been happening, what happened in the past, but how they can grow and learn from that. And I think a lot of times too, I feel like recently I've taken that performance conversation with my managers and leaders and executives and really like use this time as a level set, what is expected. And in a startup world, you're constantly shifting, you're
Mhm.
agile, you're trying to scale and grow. So what might have worked 6 months ago is not going to work for you in the next 6 months. And that's okay, right? That's kind of part of the growing process. So
Mhm.
not expecting your employees, even your leaders, to know that, but to communicate that and to say, okay, great that we worked on that this time and it got us to here, but now we need to shift gears and focus on this, or we need to double down and do even better next year, whatever the concept
Yeah.
might be. So setting
Hmm.
those expectations, I think actually for me is the most critical part of the conversation of your performance review cycle, whether you're doing it annually, hopefully not, semi-annually,
Hmm.
quarterly, whatever is happening, just having that reset moment of you've done well. Here's where you can continue to grow. And oh, by the way, we're kind of shifting gears. Here's what we're going to be focusing on as a company. And that means this for you. And my expectation of you and our team is Y.
Yeah.
And having that just really out there. What did you get from that? Like circling back and saying, hey, what was your perspective of that conversation? What are you thinking about doing differently, in the next quarter or 6 months, whatever time frame it might be?
Absolutely. Well, and I love what you brought up. So this I think brings up another interesting area of performance, right? Like another principle we can be thinking about at this time of year. And it was you had brought up this point about like one of the pieces of this conversation is often where do you want to grow in the next year? And
Mm-hmm.
so one way to think about this as a leader, but also as someone like within an organization, is to more or less say, how is it that every year, like I could identify something that makes my value or my impact to the company like better. And as a leader, that might look different than, if you're in a role within the company, but actually it doesn't matter. There are things that we all need to like learn because as you said, what was enough or what was working 6 months ago, particularly in a volatile and somewhat uncertain like climate. But also just the fact that as human beings, we want to grow. When while part of us likes to be comfortable, and certainly
Yeah.
when we're operating outside of our comfort zone, when we're a beginner at something again, it is uncomfortable. However, like things move fast in a startup world, and often require continual growth and learning. And so
Mhm.
rather than expect that that is somehow going to like happen on the side, and I can tell you like the way our biology is built, we don't like being uncertain. Like our
No.
natural instincts will not be to gravitate towards that. And so I think it is really helpful to call out this is a thing I'm willing to be a beginner at again. Um,
Mhm.
and also talk about why would it be valuable. So as a founder, for example, again, very busy, your time is really valuable, so you need to be pretty focused about if you're going to be learning about something, where are you focusing that. But it's still a really important question to say what would give me the most value if I were able to go from 0 to 1 or 1 to 10 in that thing this year, based on where the industry is going, where my startup is going, all of that. So when I think about learning, so we know it can be uncomfortable, but that is why it's often very helpful to give yourself some process because most of the learning we do as adults, it's not structured like the way we were when we were in school. Like where you
No, it's
you got to
not.
show up, like there was a process already defined. There were people actually devoted to make sure you got through, and even the resources. Right, there's usually a textbook. And then there were clear test yourself moments, right? Where you got
Mhm.
recognition and feedback about how you were doing. Okay. Once we're learning as adults, when we are in the workplace, and particularly when the learning is around something like a startup, growing a company, where the whole point is not necessarily to do it how everyone else did it before, because you're
Sure.
trying to make a unique impact on the market. Um, it's more challenging because we didn't learn how to learn that way. And so, one of the things I think is really important is to give yourself some process. So, this idea of saying, uh, even starting and saying, well, what do I know already about this thing, and what do I think might be some of the most important resources to use? This can also be people to talk to. Uh, Again, they're no longer textbooks, but we have ChatGPT. We have tons. I mean, I don't know, millions, billions of hours of YouTube videos.
Oh yeah.
There is a lot out there. And so I
TikTok
often
has now become
recommend,
a place that people use as well for
yes,
training. In
right.
fact, I have a coworker who said his daughter, she's like, "What's Google?" She searches everything on TikTok, and I was like, "Wow, generation gaps. Just the way that we use technology is so different too."
Yeah. So you identify what would be useful to learn. Then I recommend saying, what resources could you use? And just brainstorm the list of sometimes a 1 hour conversation with an expert is worth reading like 5 books. That being said, sometimes there are topics, like, for example, when people want to learn about sales and become better at sales, there are fabulous resources out there. Like, it can be worth reading a book. Um, and then I often recommend plan a start date and identify what your 0 to 1 is. 0 to 1 might be, I'm going to spend 30 minutes, identify 3 articles that seem like the best. I'm going to read those articles. And then I'm going to map out, like, what did I learn and what gaps, like, where did it point me in terms of what else I might need to learn or who else I might go talk to. And so often it's really helpful to say, well, if I were going to invest 20 hours in this year, after you've done like a 0 to 1, you then might be able to map out, like, here's where I might spend the next like 5 hours. And then from that 5 hours, you could say, well, what would be worth spending the next period of time on? But
I
I
like
think
that.
yeah, it's something that we don't always get taught how to do, but
No.
we can't mess it up. It's just, I think it's one of those things where we have to acknowledge that there isn't a process, but that we can put a process to it. And then often the most important thing is get going. Don't stop too early. Right. And make sure you plan some time for it. And even that, if
And
that's like
hold
an hour
yourself
a
to
week.
that time. Don't let other things on your calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I love that. And I think as you were talking through a little bit of a sidebar twist of the conversation here is one of the things as a manager myself, when I'm interacting with my employees and helping them grow, you said earlier, sometimes it's talking to a subject matter expert. And I think that's so vital to be able to identify, here's someone that you could get mentored from, grow and learn from. Maybe you shadow them, maybe they let you kind of do a more junior kind of activity with them over watching and helping you
Yeah.
not like completely fall down, right? It might catch you a little bit. But
Hmm.
I don't remember where I learned the term feed forward, but I know that a lot of times a lot of like resentment around performance conversations is that you just feel like you're being attacked and what you've done
Yeah.
bad, right? So
Hmm.
it's like let's start the conversation like what's really going well, and then changing the wording to be about where we can talk about we can continue to grow. And if you've created a space where people recognize no one is 100% perfect in every aspect, we all have places we can grow, then let's use that as the foundation to say, what are the areas that will be beneficial in your role for this company, for the things we need to focus on in this quarter or year. However, like,
Yeah.
being in a startup, sometimes quarters feels like 5 years. So I tend to see kind of like things in quarterly perspective, not annually, but and then constantly providing feedback on how they're doing, but I call it feed forward. And it just feels like feed forward is like, hey, let's learn from this. I'm not coming at you and putting you out in a timeout or telling you that you did anything wrong, but here's how you could do it better in the future. And I feel like
Hmm.
the wording is so important because then we don't put our shackles up. We don't like, put our walls up. Like, we're like, oh my gosh, I'm being told I'm horrible. No, no, no. It's like, here's how you can grow. And
Yeah.
and then those things that get triggered in all of us from our past experiences and our own lives and our own way of interpreting the world doesn't get triggered, hopefully. And you're still open to hearing what you're being told so that you can execute on growing in that area.
I love that. And this is like as a piece of the conversation. So one piece of our learning structure is, how might we measure our progress? And so one of the great things that can even be a question that you ask someone to say, hey, this is the area you want to learn and grow in. Awesome. Like, how should we measure progress? Like, for example, one thing that could be a piece of that is feedback. Like, what do you think is the right frequency, right? Like, sometimes, for example, if you're getting feedback too frequently, like, it can feel like, hey, I haven't had enough time since the last, piece of feedback you gave me to integrate, build the muscle memory, like, and fully manifest that feedback, even if you're actively working on it. So it can feel really disheartening if you get feedback the next
Yeah.
day, which is like, oh yeah, like how you're presenting in meetings still isn't how we talked about it. And
We're
so even
humans. It's not a
having
flip of the switch, right? You got to give it
exactly
time.
right, but like having someone who as they're thinking about their growth pathway, letting them buy into like how should we do the feedback? Like what feels like the right rhythm? And that way they own it also. So it's not like
Yeah,
something being delivered to them. It's something that they're like, yep, I want that feedback because I do want to get better. I know it's coming. And this is a part of my learning process and my structure
I
that I'm
love
creating
that.
for myself.
Yeah,
Um,
making them a part of the conversation, not talking at them, but talking with them.
exactly.
I love that. That is so awesome. I feel like we could probably sit here and talk all day about different ways to, manage performance. We didn't even get into the high performer conversation, which I really wanted to. I'll have to have you on again at some point in time. But as we wrap up here, is there any last thoughts, final ideas, tricks, tips, tools that you could share with the audience today?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I think one of my best tips, and this is something that we all get wrong sometimes, but sometimes we find that we're looking around for something new, like a new hack, a new tip, a new trick. And particularly as we're looking ahead to the year, trying to think about how to maybe optimize our performance over the next year, it's very easy to think,
Innovative.
yeah, I need an innovative new thing. There's something I'm just not getting that maybe everyone else knows it. Or I find that we often can spend a ton of time thinking through that, looking for that new, like the silver bullet or the thing, when we already know some very useful, effective tool that we could start applying tomorrow. And my advice and my tip is that take the thing you know is effective and focus on doing it. So like don't say how am I'm going to find that new idea. I think often is way more valuable to say sit down with your calendar and start to actually map what is the time and when I'm going to start doing the thing that I know would be effective. It might not be new or flashy or innovative, but would be effective and actually spend your time figuring out how to start executing on that thing consistently. And that most often the people who are performing at a high level are using that. They are saying, I already know many things that would be great to do. Focus on one of those. And yeah, if I truly encounter a very good idea, like great, I can always change and start implementing that. But don't wait to get started. Just get started with something you know would be effective. So that's probably my last tip.
I love it. Thank you so much, Carla. And I hope the audience got some things out of it. I know I did. And thanks for joining us today. And we'll see you on the next one. Take
Awesome. Thanks
care.
for having me, Guinevere.
Absolutely. Bye, guys.